Hello and welcome to Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. Hope you're having a great day. In this video, we are going to discuss again one of my favorite topics, sometimes just because of the controversy it incites, but it's the nature of food and the afterlife. Eating food and being in a higher dimensional plane of existence. And so there is, of course, a school of thought, probably some of the same people who like to fight a lot about this subject or call me ignorant in the comments and all this kind of stuff. But they say that, when we pass away, we become all-knowing, perfect beings that have no need for any type of, for example, let's say physical nutrient or even the ability to function on a physical level. Again, the formless orb of light in a sea of love, this kind of stuff, which I'm not saying those are not real planes of existence, but it's limiting the scope of what's really out there to kind of put a narrow confine in I suppose the realm of experience. So anyway, in this video, we're going to look at one of the best channeled sources, in my opinion, which is the Law of One. And I'm going to be citing more from the Law of One in the near future. One reason is that the Law of One actually is similar to some other channeled works like Silver Birch. The Law of One takes a sledgehammer and smashes many of these new age tropes that I debunk a lot on this channel or in my books, making this, in my opinion, a credible source of information. But it also goes much deeper into the nature of the cosmic hierarchy, or that kind of astral dimensional hierarchy, as well, I think more importantly, concerning the vast sort of responsibilities that we undertake depending on what level of existence that we choose to go on, and the scope of the change in our mental consciousness and awareness abilities, depending again on what level of the spectrum that we're on. But it also goes deep into, well, the nature of evil and many other topics that I'll make more videos about, or talk about certain subjects and use some bits of the Law of One to maybe help explain some of these things. But I think food is a fun place to start. And again, the material is written sometimes a bit strangely. It can be very dry, but it lines up ultimately with Jürgen's work. If you read Jürgen's work, it lines up with, actually, with many of the good sources of information, even from spiritualist literature. You just have to adapt it a little bit to the terminology, to what you may know from using different terminologies. So we'll get into that in a second. But real quick, before we go further, if you like these types of topics, go down, hit that subscribe button, share the video, like the video, leave a comment down below. Helps keep this channel going, and to help struggle against YouTube, which keeps channels like this one kind of pushed to the bottom of the barrel. So they don't want this kind of information out there, so we got to fight back. So this is in Law of One, law-of-one.info, regarding densities. And so a questioner asks this woman who claims to be channeling this billion-year-old extraterrestrial entity that was also the identity of the Egyptian god Ra. So the questioner asks, I'm guessing that it is not necessary to ingest food in fifth density. Is this correct? Now, let's back up before we go further so we know what the heck we're talking about here. Using our known terminology, here's how it goes. Okay, second density is like an insect, or maybe I don't know, something that is, it doesn't mean it's light, it's less important. It means that its conscious awareness level is currently at a stage of evolution and learning where, like, it's an earthworm, it's not yet on a higher consciousness spectrum. Third density is our plane of existence right now. So in some ways, an earthworm is in its own plane of existence. Third density is our plane of existence here, in this world as humans. Fourth density is what we would call the astral plane, the astral earth, the astral civilizations. It's also the density spectrum, I think, of many extraterrestrials that come down to visit us. When you see UFOs, that they are almost in a way on a dimensional spectrum coming from the same place that our deceased friends and family members are on. And this is also confirmed through out-of-body experiences when we see like ETs walking around on the astral spectrum like it's nobody's business, right? So this is the fourth density is the astral spectrum. The fifth density we would call the upper or greater astral spectrum, described in the Law of One material much the same way as Jürgen Ziva describes it in Multidimensional Man and Vistas of Infinity. So the fifth density is when you get into that level where you also have the ability to create realms with your mind. You can do things that would be unimaginable and awesome to people on the astral spectrum. So like you're in a whole league further ahead once you've hit fifth density. And then you have sixth density, which is a whole league further ahead than the greater astral conditions, if you can imagine that. But it's thing is that Law of One puts things into some pretty strong perspectives though of what's really going on in these densities and how it all works. So now the questioner asks, I'm guessing that it is not necessary to ingest food in fifth density. So the questioner is saying, look, we see people on the astral plane are still eating, so it must not be necessary on the greater astral plane to have to eat, right? Wouldn't it be a bit redundant? So Ra responds, I am Ra. He always says this. This is incorrect. However, the vehicle needs food which may be prepared by thought. The questioner asks, what type of food would this be? You would call this type of food a nectar or ambrosia or a light broth of golden white hue. What is the purpose of ingesting food in fifth density? This is a somewhat central point, Ra says. The purpose of space-time is the increase in catalytic action appropriate to the density. One of the preconditions for space-time existence is some form of body complex. Such a body complex must be fueled in some way. Here's what he's saying. All of these density levels that we can call astral levels, we could say, yes, there's not linear time and we can affect the boundaries of space and time, but it is still a space-time, how does he say it? Like just space-time. It's still an existence in a spectrum of tangible reality that is shared with others. Now, I would argue there may be existences outside of tangible reality when we talk about truly non-physical environments. And yet, I'm not so certain if those environments are the end-all, be-all more than it is like taking a joyride into like a crazy parallel reality. But at the end of the day, we as spirit beings are in these space-time existences, and when we are in those existences, one of the preconditions for it is what he calls like a body complex. So a tangible manifestation of the soul's location in some form of space-time geography. So no matter what, so long as there is a soul existing in some part of that spectrum, it's going to have to represent itself some way to be able to interact in that spectrum. But in all of these situations, it has to be given some type of fuel to be able to operate. And this is where the concept of food and drink comes in. Let's take a quick sip of my tea. So, to continue, the questioner asks, so there is in third density, the fueling of our body complex is not only simply fuels the complex, but gives the opportunities to learn service. In fourth density, it also fuels us and gives us opportunities to learn patience. In fifth density, it fuels the complex, but what does it teach? Okay, so, and this is the important point from the raw materials, what they're saying is that there's different lessons we learn through our experiences in life. And so on this plane of existence, eating and drinking teaches us patience. We have to be able to take time out 3 times a day, or maybe 2 times a day if you're on a low-calorie diet, or maybe 6 times a day if you're like my buddy who's a bodybuilder, and provides sustenance into the body complex, the third density body complex that we are now in. So that's the role here. Now on the fourth density, and this is the key. So now we're on the like what we call the astral plane, focus 27, whatever you want to call it. It's all different terminology for the same thing. Ra basically says that you still have to sustain your body complex on the fourth density. You have to eat stuff. And this is what I've been noticing, and I almost I've refrained from mentioning this because I know we do a lot of arguing on here sometimes, but I don't want to sometimes argue with people, so I don't like to bring this point up. But in all my astral experiences going into what Ra would call the fourth density, like, why are people always eating? Why are there always restaurants? Why do I see my mom and she's cooking minestrone? Is it all just a social activity that has no purpose beyond the social enjoyment? Or is there a greater reason that people are always eating? And is it really like, some of the cynics will say, well, because people are just overly attached to their habits, but you don't have to eat. And I've sometimes said this as well because I used to believe this, and I guess it makes more sense at first blush, but it doesn't make as much sense when you spend a lot of time on that side and you begin talking to people and seeing how they live their lives, that they just, that the eating continues. And what Ra is saying is that the reason for this is that they still have to eat. You still have to eat to keep your astral vessel going. You still got to eat that minestrone, and you still got to sit down 3 times a day and put food in that astral body to keep it sustainable. This is, so says Ra from the Law of One, and seems to be what I notice as well. So it's not just a social activity, possibly. And we can't just, again, be cynics. And there's a lot of cynics in this field, or people who kind of want to believe that they're coming at this from a vantage point of all-knowing wisdom when maybe they're not, to look at people's lives there and say, well, they're all idiots. They're all just repeating earthly habits that they don't have to. I don't think people are as dumb as people think they are. When you're on that side and you begin to feel an energetic imbalance because you're not nourishing your fourth density body complex, then you're going to eat something, just like you do here. It's part of the same space-time system that's in effect. But here's the difference according to the Law of One. The difference is that on third density, eating also teaches us the nature of service to other people, because you see someone because we have to eat to where we've suffered mortal death if we don't. So we see somebody who's starving and we give them a sandwich. Service to others. We take care of people financially, or we give people money, or we do transactions to earn money. If you donate to the Patreon at Patreon, it helps me buy food while I live out of a backpack and I make videos and do this type of work, right? So you're in service to others, you're in service to me, and then I take some of that money here in Philippines and I give it to someone who's clearly hungry at the market. Now I'm spreading that around, and then they're able to use the money to eat. So this also, food creates all these lessons in service to other people. On fourth density, or on the astral plane, or the quote afterlife, we basically have to learn about patience. So we can't just be willy-nilly running around without being bound to a kind of law of the time-space environment of that dimension. So we still have to sit our butts down and eat, and that's it keeps us grounded in a level of patience. And I would say, of course, eating, especially on that plane of existence, is extremely enjoyable when it comes to creating combinations of recipes. Again, Tony Bourdain is not an orb of emotionless energy floating around Again, he's Tony Bourdain, and if I had to guess, he probably has a big old French restaurant in Astral, New York City. Probably looks about 38 years old, and he's on top of the frickin' world right now. That's Tony Bourdain on the fourth density. So no one's going to argue with me successfully and tell me that Tony Bourdain lost all desire or interest in eating food when he's in a realm of existence most likely where you actually still have to eat food to subsist, according to this material, but also according to what I've observed in my astral travel experiences. So even independent of whenever I first read this, which I think I probably first read this like a year ago, independent of that, I encountered the same phenomenon. So now the question is, what about food when you get to the upper astral plane, above what we would call Focus 27, the astral earth, Summerland, all different names for the same conditions, which is like a kind of heavenly, nice, but Earth-like environment. In this case, it's the same size of the Earth, corresponds to all the earthly geographies, cities, and people fly around, teleport around, have great lifestyles basically, and live happy lives in an afterlife, right? But what about levels above that world, which we know are out there? What we call the greater astral plane. Even the super astral plane, but the greater astral, which is a highly sublime realm of existence with highly expanded mental capabilities. Again, you're creating entire realms just with thought, kind of the world of the deity almost, where would we conceptualize Zeus or Odin existing? Well, it would be the upper spectrum. And again, very, very beautiful looking, very magnanimous of sight and mind. And surely on this spectrum, there would be no need to eat anything still, right? Because now it's more quote, non-physical, correct? But Ra says no. So he said that, again, there's a kind of ambrosia or something, which also lines up with some of the spirit sources that we've studied. So ambrosia, nectar, a light broth of a golden white hue. So there's this kind of higher energy version of food that only comes in a few varieties, but everybody knows what it is, and it that's how we nourish these very like the prismatic upper astral bodies, or which are still bodies, even though like they're shape-shifting bodies. You can become any form that you want using your mind, but it's still a focus in space-time that exists, and as such has to still be nourished. So Ra says about what lesson then do you learn from eating on the upper astral world? In the fifth density is comfort for those of like mind to gather together to share in the broth. So it is that social element. Thus becoming one in light and wisdom while joining hearts and hands in a physical activity. Again, still physical, still physical activity. Thus, in this density becomes a solace rather than a catalyst for learning. So in the lower densities, fourth densities is part of the catalyst for learning, but once you get up to the upper high astral plane, it's more of the solace and more of just the social activity. So that's what you learn, but it's still a necessity. So it's not something you can think you can skip on. You still got to eat that ambrosia, whatever it is. Okay, so let's see, what else do we have here? So I think that's it for food. And then we start going into other topics. So again, there's a lot of crazy stuff. So one of the craziest stuff about the law of one material is the nature of evil. And when I mentioned before that it takes new age tropes and smashes them with a sledgehammer, a big one is the idea of people saying, la-di-da, evil isn't real, Hitler is in heaven with all of the other angels, because when you die you become perfect and you ascend, you immediately ascend, you become one with all, with love and light, and everyone is, in heaven, and, I think, I did a couple of videos back. I talked about the Hitler thing, and he's not in heaven. He's not in, quote, hell, but it's not really it's the murky, maybe levels below fourth density or somewhere in between. It's very the very, very kind of like nuts and bolts physical realms. But the point being is that the people who carry this trope on argue there's no such thing as evil, and the law of one material goes into really all like equal parts like mind-blowing explanations about the nature of evil, and maybe a little bit terrifying as well, as we learn that as you go on a path, the path of finding your oneness with infinite consciousness or source consciousness, that there are certain souls that find that through the love of self, the narcissist, the sociopath, and that this becomes such an inward path laced by evil and destruction, but it's still a path towards source, but it's a corrupt path. And it can lead to expanding into these higher dimensions, even the uppermost, not an uppermost, but like the upper fifth density, the upper astral. Even imagine existing on that level and finding that there's still evil entities, even on that level. And that's what Ra talks about. And I'll talk about that in a couple of videos up. So stay tuned, subscribe if you want to hear me talk about that. And let me know what you thought of this video. And you can get involved at afterlifetopics.com. Pick up a book like Understanding Life After Death, The Afterlife, and Beyond, and more. Learn about the true nature of what's going on with our multidimensional existence that has been hidden from you. The powers that be don't want you to know about what's really going on. All right, well, thanks for watching this, and I'll catch you on the next video.